I had just stepped through my front door, arms full of retirement boxes, when my daughter-in-law appeared without warning. No knock, no greeting, just a sharp click of her heels on my tile floor. "Emily," she announced, using my first name without a trace of warmth. "I've made a decision. I'm selling your car. You don't need it anymore. A woman your age has no business driving around the city." I smiled, just smiled. She had no idea what she'd just set in motion. By the next morning, my car would be gone, but not for the reason she imagined. And the look on her face when she discovered the truth, that made 40 years of teaching worth it. Let me start from the beginning. It was a Tuesday afternoon in late September. I just returned from Lincoln Elementary School with the last box of my belongings. 40 years compressed into cardboard. Faded photographs of generations of students, yellow diplomas, a chip mug that read Teacher of the Year 1998. 40 years of waking at 5 in the morning. 40 years of wiping runny noses, bandaging scraped knees, teaching children who arrived not even knowing their own names how to read. Now, at 67, my retirement had finally arrived. I was organizing pension documents at my dining room table when I heard the front door open. No knock, no courtesy call of hello. Just a creak of hinges and those unmistakable heels striking tile like a judge's gavel. Jessica entered my house as if she owned it. She wore her navy blue power suit, the one she always chose when she wanted to intimidate. Her hair was pulled back, so tightly it seemed to stretch her skin. And those eyes, cold, calculating eyes that mentally inventoried everything they touched, pricing what could be taken. She didn't greet me. She planted herself in front of my table, arms crossed, hip cocked, regarded me like a subordinate awaiting orders. "Emily," she began. Never Mrs. Salazar, never Mom, always just Emily. "I've made an important decision about your future. I'm going to sell your car. You don't need it anymore. It's dangerous for a woman your age to be driving around. Besides, Michael and I need the money for a down payment on a bigger apartment." Just like that. No discussion, no request. She spoke as if deciding what to do with an old piece of furniture that had outlived its usefulness. My silver sedan. That 2010 model I bought with 2 years of savings. Saturday tutoring sessions. Sunday morning selling homemade pies on the corner. That car had carried me to school every morning for a decade. It had transported my son when he was a boy. It had hauled groceries for families in need. It had witnessed my tears when I became a widow and my laughter when Michael graduated college. I felt something crack open inside me, a fissure like the first split in an earthquake. But instead of collapsing, something strange happened. I smiled, a small, calm smile that seemed to unsettle her. Her eyebrows furrowed slightly. "Did you hear me?" she demanded, using that tone reserved for people she considered slow to understand orders. "I heard you perfectly, Jessica," I replied with a calmness that surprised even myself. "Good. I'll be here tomorrow at 10 for the keys. I already have a buyer lined up. He'll give us $4,500. It's a fair price for a car that old. $4,500 that I knew would never touch my hands." She turned and left exactly as she'd entered, without a goodbye, leaving only the lingering scent of expensive perfume and the weight of her words pressing on my chest like stones. I closed the door behind her. I stood in my living room, surrounded by retirement boxes, feeling the walls closing in, but that smile didn't fade, because Jessica had just made the biggest mistake of her life. She awakened something in me that had been dormant far too long, my dignity. And what she didn't know, what no one in my family knew, was that I had an ace up my sleeve, a secret I'd guarded for 25 years, a card I was finally ready to play. If you want to know how this retired teacher gave the harshest lesson to the person who tried to strip her of everything, stay with me until the end, because what happened next changed everything. I should have seen the signs when Jessica first entered our lives like a hurricane disguised as a summer breeze. But mothers always want to believe the best about the person who makes their son smile, even when that smile doesn't quite reach his eyes. It was February 2022. Michael was 42, and I'd long since abandoned hope of seeing him married. Not because he was a good man, he was too good, too noble, too trusting. The kind of person who believes everything he's told, who never suspects ulterior motives, who thinks the world is as honest as he is. I'd raised him alone since he was 7, when his father died in a construction accident. We received no compensation, nothing. Just a 7-year-old boy and an elementary school teacher earning $1,500 a month. Those were brutal years. I remember packing lunches at 5 in the morning, ironing his school uniform while he slept, inventing games, so he wouldn't notice we had no money for toys. I sold cupcakes at school, sold for neighbors, tutored until 11 at night to pay for his college education. Michael studied accounting, graduated with honors, landed a position at a mid-sized firm earning about $3,000 a month. Stable, responsible, good, just lonely until she arrived. Jessica appeared at his office one April day, selling health insurance. 28 years old, nearly 15 years younger than my son. Tall, thin, with that intimidating kind of cold beauty. Straight hair falling to her shoulders. Perfectly manicured nails. Clothes that announced she knew exactly the effect she had on men. Michael introduced us 3 weeks later. I still remember that afternoon. I made pot roast, mashed potatoes, green beans. I used my embroidered tablecloth, the one reserved for special occasions. I wanted to make a good impression. Wanted her to see that my son came from a family with values, with warmth. Jessica arrived 40 minutes late. No apology. She sat at my table, studied the pot roast as if it might be contaminated, and announced, "Oh, I don't eat much. I'm watching my figure." Michael laughed nervously. I swallowed the insult like broken glass. During that meal, Jessica did exactly 3 things. Checked her phone every 2 minutes, complained about how expensive everything was compared to the big city she came from, and asked, with a smile that never touched her eyes, whether I'd ever considered selling my house. "This area is really appreciating," she said, running her finger along the rim of her water glass. "A property like this, even though it's small and, let's say, traditional, could be worth about $250,000, maybe more. Have you ever thought about it, Emily?" Emily. Not Mrs. Salazar, not Mom. Just Emily, as if we were friends of the same age. Michael gazed at her, as if every word from her mouth was divine revelation. I smiled politely and changed the subject. But that night, alone in my kitchen at 2 a.m, I couldn't shake the knot in my stomach. 6 months later, they were married. 6 months. Not even a proper courtship. Michael called with the news like someone announcing they bought a new car. Excited, rushed, not letting me speak. "Mom, Jessica is incredible. She makes me so happy. We're getting married at the courthouse next Saturday. Just something simple. You, us, 2 witnesses. Nothing fancy. Nothing fancy because they had no money for a wedding. Or rather, because Michael had no money. I later discovered that Jessica had debts. Mountains of them. Credit cards maxed out on designer clothes. A personal loan of $3,500 she'd never repaid. And a history of jobs that lasted 6 months before she was fired or quit. But I didn't know any of that yet. On their wedding day, I brought a homemade cheesecake. Jessica didn't even taste it. "Too many calories," she said. From that day forward, my son began to disappear. Not physically, but in essence. Sunday dinners, which had been sacred, became increasingly rare. First every 2 weeks, then monthly, then almost never. When I asked, he always had the same excuse. "Jessica has plans, Mom. You know how it is." No, I didn't know. Because when I was a wife, I never kept my husband from his mother. Phone calls that used to be daily shrank to brief WhatsApp messages. "Busy, Mom. I'll call you later." But later never came. When I finally visited their rented 2-bedroom apartment, I felt Jessica timing every minute of my presence like someone counting down until an unwanted guest leaves. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was hearing Michael repeat her words like a trained parrot. "Mom, don't you think you should consider moving somewhere smaller? Maintaining a house is a lot of work for a woman alone. Mom, Jessica says you should be thinking about your future. Where will you live when you're older? Mom, is it true you have savings? Because if so, you could help us with down payment on a better apartment. My son, my boy, the one I'd raised with such sacrifice, had become an echo of a woman who barely knew him. And I stayed quiet. I nodded. I smiled, because I was afraid. Afraid that if I said something, if I confronted him, if I complained, I would lose him forever. So I swallowed every hurtful comment, every insinuation, every slight disguise of concern. Until that Tuesday of my retirement. Until Jessica crossed the line she should never have crossed. That's when something inside me said, enough. It wasn't a stab in the back. It was slow poisoning, designed so carefully that no one would notice except me. The next 2 years after their wedding were like watching water erode stone, drop by drop, day after day, until one morning you wake up and there's nothing solid left to stand on. It started with the loans. The first came 6 months after the wedding. Michael's voice on the phone, heavy with shame. Mom, could you lend us $500? Jessica had some unexpected medical expenses. We'll pay you back next month. I promise. $500. Almost a third of my bi-weekly paycheck. But it was my son. Of course I gave it to them. They never paid it back. 3 months later, Mom, we need $1,200 to fix Jessica's car. The engine died. It's urgent or she'll lose her job. $1,200 from my emergency savings. They never repaid that either. Then it was $2,000 for an incredible investment opportunity. Jessica had discovered a multi-level marketing beauty products business, promising 300% returns. Mom, this will change our lives. In 6 months, we'll pay you back triple. That business collapsed in 2 months. Jessica never mentioned it again. I never saw that $2,000 in total. Over those 2 years, I lent them $7,300. $7,300 from a teacher earning $1,600 a month. But the money wasn't the worst part. The worst part was how Jessica started creeping into my life like poison ivy. It began with casual visits when I wasn't home. Michael had always kept a spare key for emergencies. Now Jessica used it to enter my house when I was out tutoring or shopping. I'd return to find things moved, drawers opened, paper shuffled. Oh, Emily, we just stopped by to drop something off, and I took the opportunity to look for that receipt you asked about. Jessica would say when I confronted her by phone, using that sweet voice she deployed when caught doing something wrong. But I'd never asked for any receipt. She was searching, investigating. But for what? I didn't know yet. Then came the comments about my house. This house is too big for you alone, don't you think? 3 bedrooms and you only use 1. Such a waste. This neighborhood is dangerous for an older woman living by herself. Have you thought about moving into a building with security? Safer, more practical. A 1-bedroom apartment would only cost you $1,200 a month in rent, and you could sell this house. Imagine all that money in the bank. All that money she could help me manage. Michael nodded along to everything like a puppet whose strings she pulled. Family Sundays, once sacred, transformed into interrogations disguised as conversation. So, how much do you get from your pension, Emily? Do you have life insurance? In whose name? Have you made a will? Because you should. At your age, you never know. At my age, as if I were 90, I was 65, healthier than many 40-year-olds. But to Jessica, I was already a useless old woman waiting to die. And Michael said nothing. He never said anything. The worst moment came on a Sunday last November. We were eating chili I'd been preparing since 6 that morning. Michael had 2 servings. Jessica barely touched hers, as usual. Then, mid-meal, she dropped a bomb. Emily, Michael, and I have been thinking. We believe it would be best for you, for your well-being, if you considered moving into a senior living facility. My blood froze. A facility? I asked, unable to believe what I was hearing. Yes, but not just any facility. A quality one, where there are nurses, activities, people your age, where you won't be alone all day. It's what's best for you. What's best for me? I repeated slowly. What's best for her, I realized, was an empty house she could sell or rent. Mom, it's not a bad idea, Michael mumbled without meeting my eyes. You'd have more company. Company? Me, who'd spent 40 years surrounded by children, colleagues, parents? Me, who had friends, neighbors, life? They wanted to warehouse me in a nursing home as if I were already senile. I'm not going to any facility, I said with a firmness that surprised even myself. This is my house. I bought it with my own work, and this is where I'm staying. Jessica's lips pressed into a thin line. Michael stared at the floor. They didn't bring it up again that day, but I knew they hadn't given up. In the following weeks, Jessica launched a new strategy, public humiliation. At a family gathering at my cousin Helen's house, Jessica announced to everyone in front of me, "Oh, cousin, take good care of Emily. You know how elderly people are. They forget things." The other day, she left the stove on, nearly burned the house down. A lie. I had never left the stove on, but everyone looked at me with concern and pity. Another time, at the supermarket, I ran into a former colleague. Jessica, who'd accompanied me that day to help carry bags, said to her, "Mrs. Lucy, how nice to see you. Say, do you know a good neurologist? Emily's been very forgetful lately. Michael and I are worried." I wasn't forgetful. My mind was sharper than ever. But Jessica was building a narrative, painting me as a senile old woman who needed a guardian. And worst of all, Michael didn't defend me. He never defended me. One day I confronted him when he came over alone to drop off medication. "Michael, why do you let Jessica talk about me like that?" He fell silent, staring at the floor like when he was a boy caught doing something wrong. "She doesn't speak badly of you, Mom. She's just worried." "Worried? She's making me look like I've lost my mind." "Don't exaggerate, Mom. Jessica loves you. She just wants what's best for you." "What's best for me?" That phrase again. I realized something terrible in that moment. I'd lost my son. Not the physical Michael, but the Michael I knew. The noble boy, the grateful young man, the good man. That Michael had been replaced by a stranger who repeated his wife's words as if they were gospel truth. That night I cried. I cried like I hadn't cried since my husband's death. Because losing a child to death is painful, but losing a child while they're still alive is unbearable. And just when I thought the pain couldn't get worse, my retirement day arrived. The day Jessica decided my car was no longer mine. That was the day something inside me died, and something new, something stronger, was born. To understand why what happened next mattered so much, I need to take you back 25 years to 1999, the year I met Mr. Stephen Morgan. Mr. Morgan lived next door in a small one-story house painted pale yellow, with purple bougainvillea climbing the entire facade. He'd been a widower for 10 years. No children, no close family. Just him, his memories, and his rose bushes. He was 73 when we met. I was 42 and newly widowed. We became friends by chance. One afternoon I saw him struggling with grocery bags, trying to open his door. I went over to help. He invited me in for coffee. I accepted. That cup of coffee became a ritual. Every Saturday afternoon, after shopping, I'd stop by his house. Mr. Morgan would make coffee with cinnamon and brown sugar. I'd bring sweet bread from the corner bakery. We'd sit in his living room filled with black and white photographs and talk about everything. Life, death, God, loneliness. He told me things he'd never told anyone. How much he missed his wife Hope. How it hurt to wake every morning in an empty bed. How to silence a house without voices is the heaviest sound in the world. And I told him my fears. Fear of not being able to raise Michael alone. Fear of growing old without companionship. Fear that my life would be reduced to just working and surviving. Mr. Morgan listened with those wise eyes that only people who've lived much and suffered more possess. "Emily," he told me once, "life takes a lot from us, but if you pay attention, it also shows you who deserves your trust and who doesn't. Always keep an ace up your sleeve. Always." I didn't understand that phrase until years later. Over time, Mr. Morgan needed more help. Small things at first. Picking up his medicine from the pharmacy, accompanying him to the doctor, shopping when it rained heavily. I did it gladly, expecting nothing in return, because he reminded me of my own father who died when I was 23. But Mr. Morgan didn't just have that yellow house. He owned another property, one he bought in the 70s when a quiet getaway town nearby was still affordable and peaceful. A large plot with a 2-story house, a garden with fruit trees, a 3-car garage. He'd bought it thinking he'd retire there with his wife. But hope died before they could move, and Mr. Morgan never had the heart to go alone. He rented that property out for a few hundred a month, enough to supplement his pension. The years passed. Mr. Morgan turned 80, then 83, then 85. His health deteriorated. Diabetes, high blood pressure, knees destroyed by arthritis. I went over every day. I cooked for him, administered his medication, bathed him when he couldn't manage himself, accompanied him to the hospital for every emergency. Michael, who was 17 at the time, also helped. He mowed Mr. Morgan's lawn, fixed things that broke, read the newspaper to him when his vision failed. "That boy of yours has a heart of gold, Emily," Mr. Morgan would tell me. "You raise him well, very well." In 2009, Mr. Morgan suffered a heart attack. He survived but was left very weak. One October afternoon, he called me to his house. He was sitting in his favorite armchair, the brown leather one that creaked with every movement. He held a manila envelope in his hands. "Sit down, Emily." I sat across from him, my heart heavy. I knew something important was coming. I'm 90 years old. I don't have much time left. The doctors gave me 6 months, maybe less. My eyes filled with tears. I'd come to love him like a father. "I want you to know something. I have 2 nephews, sons of my brother who died 20 years ago. They live in another state. Do you know how many times they visited me in these 10 years? I shook my head. None. 0. They call once a year on Christmas, just to check that box. Nothing more. He opened the envelope and removed some papers. "This is the deed to my property in the getaway town. According to the last appraisal, it's worth about $400,000. I also have savings, $45,000 in the bank." I froze. "Mr. Morgan, why are you telling me this?" "Because I want it to be yours. Everything. The house, the money. You've been the only real family I've had in these years. You and Michael." "I can't accept that," I said immediately. "What about your nephews?" "My nephews left me to die alone. You gave me dignity in my final years. It's already decided. I went to the lawyer last week. Everything's in your name. Legal, signed, sealed." I cried until my chest hurt. "But I want to ask you for something," Mr. Morgan continued. "Don't tell anyone. Not yet. Not even Michael. Wait. Watch. Life will show you who deserves to know and who doesn't." "Why?" "Because money changes people, Emily. It brings out the worst in them. You're good, too good, and good people are easy prey for vultures. So keep like an ace up your sleeve. And when the time comes that someone treats you like trash, when someone thinks you have nothing, when someone tries to strip you of your dignity, then you pull it out and show them you were always stronger than they thought." Mr. Morgan died 3 months later, in January 2010. His 2 nephews appeared at the funeral in expensive suits, immediately asking about the inheritance. The lawyer informed them that everything had been left to Emily Salazar. They nearly sued me. They claimed I had manipulated him, that I was a gold digger, that I'd surely blackmailed him. But all the papers were in perfect order. Mr. Morgan had even left a letter explaining his reasons. The judge dismissed the case. The nephews vanished. I never heard from them again. And I did exactly what Mr. Morgan asked. I kept the secret. I told no one. Not family, not close friends, nobody. I kept the house rented, gradually raising the rent over the years. It now generated over $1,000 monthly, deposited directly into a separate bank account nobody knew existed. For 15 years, that money grew. I invested it wisely. I paid off my mortgage. I saved. I waited. I waited to see who would love me for who I was, not for what I had. Michael passed the test for years. He was a good son, grateful, affectionate, until Jessica arrived. Then I watched my son transform into a stranger who saw me as a source of assets, as property to be managed, as a burden to be removed. Mr. Morgan was right. Money brings out the worst in people. And I had the perfect ace up my sleeve. An ace I was about to play. My retirement should have been a celebration. Instead, it became my living funeral. It was exactly 1 week before the incident with the car, A Friday afternoon. Michael had called that morning with that forced, cheerful voice he used when Jessica dictated his words. Mom, we want to celebrate your retirement. Jessica's organizing a special lunch at our apartment this Sunday at 2. Don't be late. I should have been suspicious. But part of me, that foolish part that still harbored hope, thought that maybe, just maybe, my son remembered who I was, what I meant to him. How naive I was. That Sunday, I dressed with care. I wore my sky blue dress, the one Michael had given me 3 years ago for my birthday. I applied soft pink lipstick. I styled my gray hair, which I now wore short, shoulder length. I wanted to look good, dignified. I brought a carrot cake I'd baked since 6 that morning, Michael's favorite since childhood. When I arrived at their apartment, I knocked with my heart beating fast. Hope mixed with fear. Michael opened the door. He gave me a quick, mechanical hug. The kind of hug given out of obligation, not love. Come in, Mom. The apartment smelled of store-bought rotisserie chicken, not home-cooked food. Jessica sat in the living room with her laptop open on the coffee table. She wore gray sweatpants and a white blouse. She hadn't even bothered to dress up for this supposed celebration. She didn't stand to greet me. Hi, Emily. Leave the cake in the kitchen. Not what a beautiful cake. Not thanks for the effort. Nothing. I left in the kitchen and returned to the living room. I sat in the single armchair, the one farthest in the two of them, who sat together on the main sofa like judges regarding the accused. Well, Mom, Michael began, clearing his throat nervously, Jessica and I want to talk to you about something important. Jessica turned the laptop toward me. On the screen was an Excel spreadsheet. Numbers, calculations, percentages. Emily, we've created a life plan for you, so your retirement will be more comfortable and secure. A life plan, made by her, without consulting me. What kind of plan? I asked, feeling my stomach clench. Jessica smiled, that shark-like smile she used when she thought she had total control. Look, we've analyzed your financial situation. Your pension is $1,600 a month, correct? I hadn't told anyone that figure. How did she know? Then I remember my retirement papers, the ones I'd been reviewing last Tuesday, when she walked in without knocking. She'd seen them, probably photographed them. That's correct, I replied coldly. Good. So here's the plan. She pointed to the screen. First, we're going to sell your car. It's a 2010 sedan. According to the quotes I obtained, we can get $4,500 for it. Not much, but it helps. Wait, I interrupted. We're going to sell? Who is we? You, obviously, Jessica said impatiently, as if I were stupid. But we'll help with the process because you don't understand these things. I took a deep breath. I didn't say anything yet. Second point, she continued. Your pension. $1,600 is good income for a single person, but we think you should contribute to the family. Michael is your only son. You raise him well. Now it's time to give back. Give back, as if raising a child were a business transaction. We propose you donate 60% of your monthly pension to help us. That's $960. You keep $640, more than enough for basic expenses, if you live modestly. $640. To cover electricity, water, gas, phone, food, medicine, emergencies. And how exactly would this help me? I asked. Because you'd be helping your family, Emily. Jessica replied in that condescending tone used with small children. Michael and I need to save for a down payment on a bigger apartment. We want children soon. Your future grandchild will need space. Future grandchild. Using a baby that didn't even exist as emotional blackmail. Michael stared at the floor. Coward. A complete coward. Third point. Jessica printed a sheet and handed it to me. We need you to sign a power of attorney. It's just for security. In case something happens to you, Michael can handle your legal and financial affairs without complications. A power of attorney. Complete access to my house, my accounts, my documents. And if I don't want to sign? Jessica laughed. A fake, uncomfortable laugh. Emily, don't be stubborn. This is for your own good. At your age, things can happen quickly. An accident, an illness. Do you want Michael struggling with bureaucracy, while you're in hospital? Think logically. Logic? She was talking about logic while planning to strip me of everything. And when do you need my answer? Now would be ideal. I have the appointment with the lawyer scheduled for Tuesday. Of course. She had everything arranged without asking me, without considering me. I need to think about it, I said, standing from the armchair. Mom, sit down, Michael finally said, looking at me for the first time. We haven't eaten yet. I'm not hungry. But you brought cake. Leave it for Jessica. Maybe she'll appreciate it. I took my purse and walked to the door. Emily, you're being very childish, Jessica shouted from behind me. We're just trying to help you. I didn't turn around. I didn't answer. I walked down the building stairs with trembling legs. I reached my car. I sat behind the wheel. And there, in that parking lot with the engine off and windows closed, I broke. I cried like I hadn't cried in years. Deep sobs that came from my stomach. Tears that soaked my sky blue dress, the one Michael had given me when he was still my son. It wasn't about the money. It was never about the money. It was because my son, my only son, the boy I'd raised alone, the one I'd held when he cried at night missing his father, the one who told me, you're the best mom in the world, every birthday, that son saw me as a burden, as a source of assets, as something to be managed, not as a mother, as a liability. I drove home without remembering the route. I walked into my empty living room. I sat in my armchair, and I stayed there in the dark, looking at photographs on the wall. Michael at 5 in his elementary school uniform. Michael at 15 at his middle school graduation. Michael at 24 the day he got his accounting degree. In all those photos, I was beside him, smiling proud. At what point did I become his enemy? I picked up my phone. I almost dialed. I almost gave in. I almost told them, okay, take everything. I'll sign whatever you want. Just don't abandon me. But then my gaze fell on the photograph of Mr. Morgan on my small altar next to the Virgin Mary and my husband's photo. Mr. Morgan looked at me with those wise eyes, and I remembered his words. Vultures only respect those who fly higher than them. I put the phone down. I went to my closet. From the back, behind boxes of old shoes, I pulled out a locked metal box. I opened it. There they were, all the documents. The deed to the house in the getaway town, the bank statements, the investments, the proof that I was not the vulnerable old woman Jessica thought I was. I took out my cell phone and dialed a number I'd saved for years. Mr. Bermudez, it's Emily Salazar. I need to update my will. Can you see me tomorrow? Of course, Mrs. Emily. 11 o'clock. Perfect. I hung up and smiled for the first time in weeks. Not a smile of joy, a smile of determination, because Jessica had just awakened something in me that had been dormant far too long. My dignity. And I was about to remind everyone that Emily Salazar was not a victim. She was a survivor. And survivors don't give up. They fight back. That night, I cried all the tears I'd held back for 40 years of being strong. It was 3 a.m. I couldn't sleep. Insomnia had become my most faithful companion since that disastrous Sunday lunch. I got out of bed, put on my old cotton robe, and walked barefoot to the living room. The house was completely silent, that heavy silence known only to those who live alone, the silence that amplifies every thought, every fear, every pain. I sat on the sofa, hugged my knees to my chest like a frightened little girl, and looked at the photographs filling the shelf beside the television. Michael was everywhere. Baby Michael wrapped in his blue blanket. 3-year-old Michael with his red tricycle. 7-year-old Michael the day his father died, clinging to my skirt with eyes swollen from crying. I took that photograph in my hands. I studied it as if I could find answers in that boy frozen in time. Where was that boy now? At what moment had I lost him? I remember the day of his father's accident. Charles, my husband of 12 years. A construction worker, honest to the core. The kind of man who'd share his sandwich with any co-worker who didn't have lunch. He fell from a 5th-floor scaffolding. Died instantly. The construction company gave us nothing. They claimed it was his own negligence, that he hadn't used the harness correctly. Lies. But we were poor, without lawyers, without a voice. I was left alone with 7-year-old Michael in first grade. I remember that first night without Charles. Michael couldn't sleep. He climbed into my bed crying. "Mommy, why did Daddy go away?" "He didn't go away, my love. He had to go to heaven." "Why didn't he take us?" "Because we have to stay here. But he's watching over us from above." That night, I made him a promise. I whispered it in his ear as I rocked him in my arms. "I promise you'll never lack for anything. I promise you'll get an education. I promise you'll have a better life than your dad and I had. I promise." And I kept my promise. God, how I kept it. I worked myself to the bone. Double shifts when I could. Teacher in the morning at the public school, private tutoring in the afternoons. On Saturdays, I sold pies I made starting at 4 in the morning. On Sundays, I did laundry for other people. Michael never knew how many times I went to bed without dinner, so he could have breakfast. He never knew how many times I pawned my gold earrings, my necklace, my wedding ring to pay for his school supplies. He never knew I sold the only television we had to pay for his college entrance exam. I protected him from all of that. I wanted his childhood to be as normal as possible, so he wouldn't carry the guilt of our poverty. And I succeeded. Michael graduated from accounting with honors. I sat in the front row on his graduation day, clapping until my hands hurt, my eyes flooded with pride. After the ceremony, he hugged me tight like when he was a boy. "Mom, everything I am is because of you. Everything. I'll never forget it. I promise." Where did that promise go? Where was that man who'd hugged me 20 years ago? I wiped the tears at the back of my hand, but they kept coming like an overflowing river. Because the pain wasn't just about Michael. It was about everything. About years of sacrifice that now seemed worthless. About sleepless nights caring for him when he had fevers. About times I walked in the rain because I didn't have bus fare. About birthdays I spent alone because I was working to give him his. About the life I didn't live because I invested it all in him. And now he saw me as a burden. I picked up my phone. 3:15 in the morning. I dialed Jessica's number. My finger trembled over the call button. I almost did it. I almost called her to say, "Okay, you win. You can have the car, the money, whatever you want. Just don't take my son from me. Just let me be part of his life." Because that's what hurt the most. Not losing the money. Not losing the car. Losing Michael. My finger was millimeters from pressing the button. But then my gaze drifted to the altar in the corner of the living room. The Virgin Mary my mother had given me when I got married. The flickering candle cast shadows on the photographs. Charles with his enormous smile and calloused hands from hard work. My parents, both deceased now. My mother in her floral apron. My father in his straw hat. And Mr. Morgan with his beige sweater and thick glasses, looking at me with that wisdom only life can give. I remember the conversation we'd had shortly before his death. We were in his garden. He was watering his roses. I was helping him hold the hose because his hands no longer had the strength. "Emily, do you know the difference between kindness and foolishness?" "No, Mr. Morgan. Kindness is giving when you have it to give. Foolishness is giving when you're being robbed. Kindness is helping someone in need. Foolishness is letting yourself be used by someone who just wants to take advantage. And how do you know which is which? When someone who claims to love you treats you worse than a stranger, there's your answer." I stood up from the sofa. I put the phone away. I walked to the altar and lit a new candle. "Mr. Morgan," I whispered in the quiet, "you told me to keep my ace up my sleeve. You told me to wait for the right moment. I think that moment has arrived.